Okay, welcome to our debate. We are going to have Courtney giving our first pro stater point. Go ahead, Courtney.
I believe the zero tolerance policy is ethical and necessary. Federal policy mandated that all schools adopt a zero tolerance policy in order to decrease the amount of violence that children experience in their lives and to increase social control.
Oh, hang on. It's not seeing my window. Okay, now the graph is up. So you can keep reading.
Federal policy does mandate that schools comply with zero tolerance policies. Several legislative actions have spurred schools across the nation to adopt these policies in efforts to increase safety within their districts. These policies were born out of a series of federal drug and weapon regulations enacted under President Reagan in the 1980s and have been used in schools as early as 1989 in response to incidents of drugs, violence, and gang-related activity. The implementation of these policies continued to evolve with the Clinton administration when the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, was reauthorized and Congress passed the Gun-Free School Act of 1994, which required that any state receiving funding under ESEA to implement mandatory one-year expulsion for any student bringing weapons to school to adopt a zero tolerance policy on firearms. The GSFA was a pivotal change in legislation that has forced schools to adopt zero tolerance policies, with consequences of lost funding under the ESEA for failure to comply. In the creation of this legislation, Senator Feinstein, a key sponsor of GFSA, reported to Congress that schools were losing control of students and not doing enough to assert control over the student population. The passing of this law was an approach to increase social control in a sweeping effort to provide districts with power to increase social control to prevent violence. When we talk about decreasing violence, we have to keep in mind that most students face difficult challenges every day before they even get to school. Often, students are more likely to experience particularly traumatic incidents outside of the school environment. According to a report by the National Center for Educational Statistics, students ages 12 through 18 were more likely to be victims of non-fatal, serious, violent crime, including rape, sexual assault, robbery, and aggravated assault away from the school than they were at school. These challenges can present inappropriate school behaviors. If schools are using the federal funds appropriately, counseling and behavior supports would be put into place to help students with those difficult challenges.
That's a great point. However, many students, especially those from minority backgrounds, do not receive the vital counseling and behavior supports which Rachel mentioned. Rather, minority students are treated with more reactive punishment procedures instead of proactive behavioral health interventions. Instead of removing the subjectivity from punishment and promoting a sense of fairness for students from minority backgrounds, such as those with disabilities or from different ethnicities, as originally promised, zero tolerance policies have in fact continued the accelerating trend of high suspension and expulsion rates for these students in particular. Research suggests that suspension and expulsion rates have increased since the implementation of zero tolerance policies. For example, in Chicago public schools, one analysis of expulsion rates after the implementation of zero tolerance policies has demonstrated an increase from 81 to 1,000 over a period of 3 years. Furthermore, expulsion and suspension rates have more severely impacted populations of disabled and minority students. In fact, research shows that race, special needs, and socioeconomic backgrounds were the best indicators of whether or not a student would be punished under zero tolerance policies. Bello et al. 2011 find that minorities and students with disabilities are more likely to be removed from school environments due to disciplinary reasons. Here, is the graph working?
Yep,
Yes.
that is it.
Beautiful. Here we have two graphs from library.cyprus.com which demonstrate the overrepresentation of minority students in disciplinary figures for zero-tolerance schools. On the first graph, we can see that while students with disabilities make up only 12% of the total student population, they account for 25% of all school-related arrests. For our second graph, one can see that Black students make up about 16% of total student enrollment, but are held responsible for between 32 to 42% of school suspensions and expulsions. As can be seen from these two graphs, zero-tolerance policies do not ameliorate student inequality, but instead punish minority students to an even greater extent. Between the years of 2006 and 2007, over 500,000 students with disabilities were excluded from school for violations of school safety policies for 10 days or less, and 75,864 were removed for more than 10. In one study of expulsion and suspension rates in Philadelphia schools revealed that of these instances, 35% were African American, 23% Latino, 14% white, and 5% Asian. Not only are students of minority and disability more likely to incur violations under zero-tolerance policies, they are also vastly overrepresented in the data. For example, Maryland schools reported that while African American students only made up about 38% of their school population, they represented 61% of all expulsion and suspensions, while disabled students, about only 12% of the school population, accounted for 20% of these violations. A study by Sabika 2014 shows that Black students are suspended at rates 2 to 3 times higher than those of other students, and are similarly overrepresented in office referrals, expulsions, and corporal punishment. This difference also highlights disparities amongst the types of violations for which students with diverse backgrounds are most likely to be referred. Black students were referred for more subjective offenses such as disrespect, whereas white students were more likely to be referred for objective offenses like smoking or vandalism. Thus, research tends to suggest cultural differences in the application of zero-tolerance policies across school systems. According to the research, we show that the data making up the cultural differences, however, do we see the percentage of students that make up each sex and ethnicity in the district? For example, in Decatur School District, expulsion records for the past 2 years revealed 46 to 48% of the student body was African American, and that over 82% of African Americans were suspended. Of that percentage, most were the same students over and over again. This data compares to misrepresentation of students being expelled due to race. Based on the behaviors given, such as fights, bullying, etc., students were suspended regardless of their race, their sex, or their ethnicity.
Awesome. Okay, did you guys see the first couple graphs on your big screen, or did you just see it over my face down at the bottom?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay, I'm going to stop the video and I'll check that